Have you ever looked at the ribbons on Big Boss at the end of Metal Gear Solid 3 and thought to yourself, I wonder what medals those would be in real life? Well, look no further because this video is going to resolve that exact thought. Firstly, let's establish my ground rules for this video, and if you don't care, you can just skip to the next chapter. Anyways, because there's only one medal Big Boss has that's 100% canon, it means this video will mostly be speculation. However, that doesn't mean the task is impossible, because at the end of MGS3 we see Snake has a total of 11 awards, meaning by 1964 Snake cannot have more than this. And you'll see this as we work through the video, but a lot of these have eligibility criteria that's 100% verifiable even if we don't actually play the events in question. Second, we're only going to be accounting for Big Boss's time spent with the US. I feel like it's pretty obvious a PMC commander won't be given awards by the US government, but I wanted to clarify that. And lastly, I'm going to be going in chronological order as best as I can and following the lore as best as I can. And that bit about the lore is especially important because most of Snake's pre-MGS3 life is very limited in detail, which means I need to speculate. Fortunately, however, this video is the last part of a trilogy on Big Boss I've made, and the chronology I crafted myself is gonna be what I use, so if you haven't seen them yet, I highly recommend you watch these two videos first. I'll do my best to summarize my points here, but just know you're better off watching the full videos to understand the chronology I'm using. Alright, let's stop wasting time and get into the medals. To start off, Snake would 100% have the Korean Service Medal, and simply put, if you were in Korea during the war or the surrounding waters, you are eligible for this award. The real question we need to answer is how many campaign stars Snake would have. For the unknowing, with awards like this, you add a bronze star to the award for every campaign you take part in. If you happen to hit 5 awards, then that becomes a silver star, and then you can add more brown, etc. Officially, there are 13 recognized American campaigns during the Korean War, and of those 13, only 10 have Army eligibility. Now here's the trouble, we have zero means to know what campaigns Snake took part in. All we really know is Jack joined the army in 1950 at the start of the war and fought there until the very end, which doesn't tell us jack shit. So to rectify this, I looked up the awards of the most decorated Americans during Korea, and it seems on average these men served in 1 to 3 campaigns. The most campaigns I found was actually this guy, Hiroshi Miramura, who was in 8 of the 10 campaigns. Because Jack is a badass war hero worthy of the boss's attention, I'm just gonna copy this and say Snake served in 8 campaigns during the war, which sounds in line for his character. Next, we have the UN Service Medal for Korea. It's basically the same thing as the aforementioned award, just without the campaign stars and given by the world's most useful organization. Following up on this, we have the Korean War Service Medal, which is not to be confused with the American Korean Service Medal. This one is literally the same thing again, except it's given out by South Korea's government. So yeah, Snake literally just has 3 awards for solely existing in Korea at the time of the war. That aside, the next award is actually subjective and could warrant debate, but I'm gonna make the executive decision to say Jack received the ROK Presidential Unit Citation. South Korea's government awarded this to any military units, including foreign ones, who distinguished themselves in battle during the war. And this by default limits the pool of candidates, but looking online it seems to be most Americans got this award during the war, which makes sense because if it wasn't for the US, then South Korea wouldn't exist. I also couldn't find a single comprehensive list anywhere online that detailed what units actually got this award, so I decided once again to go through that list of the most decorated Americans. Going through it, literally every single person I clicked on had this award, and even going on to r/medals and looking at people's regular old grandpa's ribbons, the vast majority of them had it too. So I think Jack having it is a safe bet. And speaking of speculative safe bets, I have zero evidence to back this one up, but I'm gonna say Snake has a bronze star with a combat V. Here's the thing, we know from the boss's dialogue at the end of MGS3 she saw a lot of herself in Jack, and I think a huge part of that would be the fact Big Boss is a valiant and skilled soldier. Remember, in this universe, the boss is the mother of the US Special Forces. She wouldn't just pick anyone to be her apprentice, she would pick someone who is special. My video on Snake's rank details this a lot more, but to summarize, if Snake joined the army in 1950 at the age of 15, which yes is the common consensus, then him having a Bronze Star with a V would be extremely impressive. The boss would 100% see this potential, especially because she would also see the insane amount of campaigns Jack took part in. Now before you type it, I know some of you are wondering why I didn't go with the Silver Star or higher, and I'll explain. Metal Gear is a story with a lot of symbolism and legend. In my mind, Jack during Korea as a teen would be a very skilled soldier, yes, but he wouldn't yet be the man we know as Big Boss. He still has much to learn, and by this point isn't much more than an underage grunt who's good with a gun. The boss, however, is hinted to have a pretty similar story, and we know she advised the SAS during World War II before she was even 22. So seeing Jack so young and so skilled, the boss would see herself in him, and after Jack's experience literally being nuked, she would take him on as her apprentice to become the legendary war hero we know as Naked Snake. The medals of the legend should track his journey into becoming that legend, and that's why I went with the Bronze Star with a V for Korea. In fact, I'll even give Jack a total of 3 Bronze Stars because of how many campaigns I decided he served in. Now finally, moving on, we have the Army Good Conduct Medal. You earn one of these for simply not getting in trouble for 3 years, and I have no doubt Jack was a good boy, so this one's easy. And lastly, for this significantly longer than I expected chapter, we have the National Defense Service Medal. I'm just gonna say it, this medal is the definition of a participation trophy, since as long as you're active duty during a conflict for any period of time, even if you have no direct involvement, you automatically get this medal. I'm gonna be blunt here, but I hate this award, and there's no reason for it to exist. Granted, I could say this about a lot of American medals because we've inflated them so badly. Just as an example, I literally have a Coast Guard unit citation for something I didn't even know happened until I got the award. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Snake definitely served between June 27th, 1950 to July 27th, 1954, so he'll have an NDSM. Moving on, finally, from Korea into the post-war, there really aren't many medals I could find that Snake would qualify for, which isn't surprising. For American servicemen who were drafted or volunteered between 1955 and the start of Vietnam, there weren't a lot of medals you could have earned during peacetime. War service was really the only way to get decked out in this time period. The only award Snake could earn more of is the Good Conduct Medal, but that depends if you keep him enlisted or assume he became an officer, since only enlisted people can earn that award. Personally, I'm still more in favor of seeing Snake as an officer, especially because after talking to some Vietnam veterans, one of whom was a Green Beret, they actually agreed with my assessment a man like Big Boss would be an officer. So yes, believe it or not, the army has changed over the course of 50 years. So with that, I'll be assuming Snake can't earn any more medals for good conduct. However, I do still see the arguments for Jack continuing to be enlisted, so when we get to the end of MGS3, I'll show another rack for if he had been a continuous good boy. Now, moving on to Vietnam, it's actually easier to identify medals Snake wouldn't have. First off, I assessed in this video here that Snake likely joined the Green Berets in 1961 and immediately got sent to Vietnam that same year. Since August 1964 is the time of MGS3, that means we have until roughly that time frame to give Snake any medals for his Nam service. And one medal Snake definitely won't have is the Vietnam Service Medal because it wasn't established until 1965. Instead, American forces who operated in Vietnam before that year were given the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, so that's one for Jack. Another medal Snake couldn't have by the end of MGS3 is another NDSM, and that's because the executive order awarding it for Vietnam service from 1961 onwards wasn't established until 1966. Hell, Snake can't even get a medal for his recognition of his Vietnam service yet from the Republic of Vietnam because the RVN campaign medal also didn't exist until 1966. And for those of you keeping score, this leaves us with a problem. Snake only has 8 awards so far, and we need to get up to 11 to be consistent with his uniform at the end of MGS3. So what is there to do? Well, that's simple. Make shit up. Looking at the awards given to Green Berets who were in CIDG, again watch my other video, it looks like a decent few have the Soldier's Medal. This award is given to anyone who valiantly and voluntarily puts themselves at risk in a non-combat scenario. More often than not, this is given out for saving people, like when Colin Powell, yes, the former Secretary of State, got into a helicopter crash during Vietnam and despite being injured managed to save 3 other soldiers. We know that prior to MGS5, Big Boss is pretty unanimously agreed to be an overall hero, and we see his good deeds plenty of times in MGS3, Portable Ops, and Peace Walker. I have no doubt in my mind that over Jack's lengthy service, he'd have for sure done acts of non-combat heroism, including in Vietnam. However, this is a somewhat rare award, so I'll only be giving Jack one of them. Next up on our list of making shit up medals, I'm going to award Snake 2 silver stars for no other reason than by this point he has to be a badass. There's good reason Snake was chosen for the Virtuous mission, and that undoubtedly isn't just because he's the boss's apprentice. Seeing as CIDG was a CIA program, they'd have for sure known Snake was a more than capable soldier, and I think him having 2 silver stars with the second being denoted with a bronze oak leaf would have weighed in on that decision. Yes, I artificially picked 2, but at this point I have no reason to downplay the soon-to-be legend. In fact, I'm even gonna give him a 4th bronze star for whatever he did in Vietnam, and you can't stop me. And lastly, to cap off this segment of the video and the start of the legend, we have the Distinguished Service Cross. This is the only medal in the entirety of Metal Gear that is without a doubt canon, as we see Big Boss receive it for Operation Snake Eater. Putting everything together from this video, this would be Big Boss's probably canonical rack. And here it is if you include the 4 good conduct medals as a result of 14-ish years of enlisted service. Moving on to post-Snake Eater, we should be done with Vietnam, right? Well, not according to the MGS wiki. Okay, I'm just gonna get distracted by this for a minute here, but it needs to be brought up. Where in the hell is this supposedly canon information coming from? The link source literally mentions no time period for Snake's Vietnam service. I checked the cutscenes of both Peace Walker and Portable Ops, and there's no mention of any of this beyond what I discussed in my last video, so I'm gonna call this segment of the wiki pure horseshit. That means we need to decide for ourselves what occurs between the end of MGS3 and when Portable Ops is set in 1970. And before I get comments saying Portable Ops isn't canon, just know Kojima himself said the overarching events are canon, just not as depicted in the game. So with that established, let's look at this dialogue between Paramedic and Big Boss in Portable Ops. Here, we can see Snake tried to retire and become an instructor and hunter after the events of MGS3, and using this dialogue from Frank Yeager, we know in 1966 Snake was in Mozambique. So, with no evidence to back up Snake ever returning to Vietnam, I think it's safe to assume he didn't, and instead found himself on a globe-trotting adventure with guns. So unfortunately, this means there's no extra medals we can give Snake during this time period. So, what about Portable Ops? After all, Snake did return to the US to form Foxhound after the San Geronimo incident. And you're right, we can give Snake a lot of backlogged medals. Namely, he'd get a 2nd NDSM for Vietnam, the RVN Campaign Medal, which South Vietnam gave to anyone who fought in the war, and he'd receive the Vietnam Service Medal. Now, for the Vietnam Service Medal, we're gonna have to do the same thing we did with Korea. Find out how many campaigns Big Boss took part in. Fortunately, however, this one is much easier because I made the assumption Snake was a part of CIDG. And more fortunately for us, the primary Green Beret unit that managed CIDG was the 5th Special Forces Group, and there's a list of every campaign they took part in during Vietnam. Using this with the assumption Snake was in Vietnam from 1961 to 64, that leaves us with only one campaign star on the ribbon from the advisory campaign. And continuing to go off of awards given to the 5th Special Forces Group, Detachment Bravo 5-2 received the RVN Gallantry Cross with a palm for their actions on the dates between May 1964 through to August 1968. I'm gonna go off on a limb and say there's a pretty good chance Snake was still in Vietnam in early 64, so I'm giving him this medal. Now, moving on from Vietnam again, what about the San Geronimo incident? Would Snake get any medals for that? Well, unfortunately, it was heavily covered up by the government. According to Snake at the end of Portable Ops, the public only got told he was sent to destroy a Soviet missile base. Whilst Big Boss got a hero's welcome home for this, the full truth simply isn't public, so the government probably settled for just giving him a second Distinguished Service Cross. And really, this speaks to a sad reality beyond Jack being stuck in constant warfare, because he can't even get the appropriate recognition for his actions due to their top secret nature. Think about Snake Eater. The man prevented the world from going into Armageddon. Snake deserves the Medal of Honor at least, and yet probably because of publicity issues, he'll never receive it. And what about all the times Snake gets injured on his missions in cutscenes? He'll never see those Purple Hearts. And whilst we're on the topic of the Purple Heart, let me address it real quick. According to Volgan in MGS3, assuming you play the game good, Snake has a beautiful body with no visible injuries. And looking at Snake's body in the survival viewer, we can see this is actually true. We can also go a step further with this because Eva's survival viewer actually shows her past injuries, and no such thing is displayed for Snake in the virtual mission. This means the only logical conclusion is that the events of MGS3 are Snake's first time getting injured in combat, which is insane. Now, a friend of mine did point out when reading the script that Snake tells Eva he has scars all over. However, as I just showed, these aren't visible, so they must all be waist down. If only there was a way to take off his pants. My personal assumption is maybe his scars are all waist down from training, especially because the boss probably beat the shit out of only his legs, I guess? Yeah, I don't know, but so far as it stands, Virtuous Mission Snake is a newborn baby. He will, however, not be a newborn baby after his torture at the hands of Volgan. Unfortunately for Snake though, the POW medal didn't exist until the 80s, so he ain't getting that one either. But there is still a chance because Big Boss returned to the US in the early 90s to retake control of Foxhound. Yeah, he still won't get the POW medal because Operation Snake Eater is still classified. But if we assume Snake was in control of Foxhound from, let's say, 1990 to 1995, which is when the events of Metal Gear 1 happened, it means he'll get a third NDSM for the Persian Gulf War. However, that's really it. Looking at all the members of Foxhound and scouring the Metal Gear lore, it doesn't look like Foxhound had any participation in the Gulf War at all. So that means Big Boss can't have the Southwest Asia Service Medal or the Kuwait Liberation Medal. But his son Solid Snake would, since he fought there as a Green Beret, but that is a topic for another time. Video baiting to gain subscribers aside, this is what I believe to be Big Boss's canonical rack by the 1990s. And here it is if you include all the good conduct medals. However, it literally didn't change from last time because he left the US right after Snake Eater. And no, Big Boss was definitely not an enlisted man by the time of Metal Gear 1 because he did the role of Colonel Campbell in Metal Gear 2 and MGS 1. And that's it. Sorry I spent the last half of this video not really adding to Big Boss's rack, but I felt it was necessary to clarify so people don't type a bunch of questions in the comments down below.